Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay O'Connor, and I'm the General Manager for Content at LexisNexis. It's my pleasure to be hosting today's webinar on navigating the next wave, making your enterprise AI ready. As you can probably hear from my accent, I am originally from the UK and moved to New Zealand about 7 years ago, where I'm now based in Auckland. Since our audience today is primarily based throughout Australia, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise the unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, water and seas, as well as their rich contribution to society. I pay my respects to ancestors and elders past and present. 2023 has been the year that generative AI has exploded onto the scene. For those outside the tech industry, there was a sense of surprise at the launch of ChatGPT and the new capabilities of large language models. There's been a sense of excitement at the potential opportunities for using generative AI, particularly to automate tasks and streamline workflows. But this has been tempered as discussion has moved to the risks of such tools, such as security concerns, ethical considerations, and a deeper understanding of issues such as AI hallucination. In today's discussion, we're going to look at how the legal industry moves beyond this initial phase of excitement and rapid upskilling as we consider how enterprises can prepare for the adoption of AI across their organizations. We're going to discuss areas such as risk mitigation, how you can take practical steps to prepare your organizations for the adoption of such technologies, and the change management that needs to form part of your strategy. We're also going to look at some of the ways LexisNexis has tackled these challenges. We recently surveyed over 600 members of the legal industry across Australia and New Zealand about their use of and attitudes towards generative AI. I'll be sharing some of those insights with you throughout today's session. As we move forward into 2024, we're likely to see the more general excitement channeled as focus moves to specific user cases where AI and generative AI technologies are seen as important additional tools in a lawyer's tech toolbox. While some of those user cases are already emerging, and we'll be considering some of those in more detail today, we're also likely to see the emergence of new user cases, as well as a resurgence of interest in areas such as the data and content that powers generative AI. Now, we want today's discussion to be as interactive as this format allows for, so please do put any questions you might have in the Q&A function, and we'll try our best to cover some of those in today's discussion. We'll also have some polling questions for you to check in during today's session. And the first of those polling questions is coming up now while I introduce our panel. While we wait for those results to come through, I'm going to introduce the members of today's panel. I'm delighted to be joined by several experts who are at the forefront of developments in this area. Natasha Bleicher is Managing Director at Sterling & Rose. Natasha has always liked thinking about what comes next. So in that respect, AI is just part of, albeit a foundational part, of the next frontier of her interest. She is a technology lawyer that specializes in emerging technology. Lawyers in this area tend to sit at the zeitgeist because that is where their clients sit, and AI is the current zeitgeist. There's often no hard and fast law at the zeitgeist, and the creation of good law at the frontier is deeply interesting to her, particularly as she has spent time living in many different countries with various degrees of working legal systems and economies. Good law makes good living. Jamie Buckley is Executive Vice President and Chief Product Officer at LexisNexis. Jamie has bachelor's and master's degrees in computer science and became fascinated about AI from that point. Before joining LexisNexis, he drove AI-focused projects at several organizations, including eBay and Microsoft. Jamie leads various AI initiatives at LexisNexis and is very excited about Lexis Plus AI launch and other areas where generative AI can help our customers. And last but not least, we have Greg Dickerson, our Managing Director for Asia and Pacific at LexisNexis. Greg is interested in AI and has always been interested in technology and its potential to make the world a better place. He loves the creativity of finding solutions to problems and enabling people to do more. AI in particular is exciting to Greg as we are teaching computers to think, but the journey needs to be carefully managed. So you might be able to see that we've had the initial poll results pop up on our screen. And I can see today that we've got a real spread of people who have joined us today for our webinar, which is fantastic. That means we've got some of you who are already using these tools and some of you who are just at that point of looking where to start. So hopefully you'll find something useful in this for all of you, wherever you're at in that journey. I'm going to turn now to our panel and start with the very big question of what does it mean to be an AI-ready enterprise? And we're going to start with you first, Greg.
What does it mean to be an AI? So first off, thank you, Lindsay. I'm very excited about this. Very excited about this panel, and also excited about hearing from the audience. So first off, what does it mean to be an AI-ready enterprise? I think that's probably the kind of question you could have asked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I'll probably give you the same answer. First off, it means you've got to be ready to use your content effectively for yourself. You've got to have well-trained people internally that know what the future is going to look like and be ready to work with the current things that you have. So it's about training. It's also about understanding the data sets that you've got. And it's about being able to use them to maximize the value that you can get in your business. And that's not always easy. I know it's particular law firms, you often have content spread out in different places, sometimes for very valid reasons. You obviously have clients and client confidentiality you need to look at, but you should also have a holistic approach to how you manage your content and how you manage your research journeys and how you use that content. Because to be AI ready, you actually need to understand what you currently have. And part of that is the content that you have, and also part of that is the people and making sure that they are ready for where the future is going. So I would say a lot of it's about upskilling your employees. It's about making sure that you have good content and that you know where it is. And then, of course, it's about using the best tools out there and making sure that those tools are adding value to your journey and the way in which you're adding value to your clients. And that's where I think you're going to see a lot of value from working with companies like us, where we can give you tools which can help you get AI ready much quicker.
Thanks, Greg. And we'll be probing some of those areas in a little bit more detail later in today's discussion. Over to you, Natasha.
I'm probably going to piggyback of what Greg said, because Greg's clearly correct in all of those things that he listed. I'll give you 5 things and there will be overlap with what Greg said, but maybe I'll say them slightly differently. People. The primary thing that you need to get ready is people. So this, and also what Greg said, this isn't a new discussion, because law firms, legal in-house teams, we've all known for a long time that digital transformation is coming. So these are some of the same concerns, questions, readiness requirements. Digital transformation is a horizontal. AI use is a horizontal. We don't do horizontals very well in law firms because we tend to be set up in practice groups and verticals. So if you want people to get digital transformation and AI uptake correct, then you need to be able to empower them across a horizontal. So connected to that is the second thing, which is KPIs. So KPIs, I have seen over and over again, digital transformation, adoption of new technologies, not really land where it needs to land, because people aren't actually rewarded for investing in these kind of technologies. And it can be done so much better if you reward excited people, because there's usually quite a lot of excited people who want to get on board with new technologies. Absolutely interested and excited people and curious people and people who are trying to moderate risk in every organization already, reward them for doing that. I certainly don't penalize them for doing that. The next thing is about governance, audit and action. So again, most organizations will already have a digitalization strategy, but we are now seeing in many organizations the development of AI strategies. If you're a computer scientist or a data scientist, you probably find that a bit laughable, because you know that narrow AI has been used in your organization for a very long time. But generative AI has actually catalyzed a new set of discussions about risk and policy, and you will see that. So we're seeing people requiring audit to go through and make sure, do you have the strategy? Do you have the budget? Do you have done the risk review and policy development and implementation around AI? So that's normal. Fourth thing, technical audit. So again, if you're going to be employing a new technology, make sure that you have the right data. Like, just again, to back up what Greg's saying, you can't get to good AI unless you have good data. And when I'm saying quality data, that's a technical concept, but be really careful that you actually control the data that you're seeking to use. So that's a big one. And in the law firm, that might be looking at your engagement letters. It may be looking at your contracts with third parties. Do you actually have the rights to the data that you need to use to use in different models? Or do you bring that third-party data in, and how does that, what's the interoperability of third-party data and third-party technical teams, technical systems with your internal systems? Are they interoperable? Last but not least is the development of evaluation frameworks and tools, safety and alignment research. These things are genuine. There are new risks that are being introduced. AI will actually reduce many risks as well, but you need to make sure right now that you have a baseline set of pre-deployment safety evaluation for your LLMs that you're using. That would probably be my hot 5 tip.
Thanks, Natasha. And interesting to see how multifaceted this approach to kind of AI readiness is. And I know we'll be exploring some of that in more detail as we talk further. Jamie, is there anything you'd like to add on this point?
Sure. Yeah, there were great answers by Greg and Natasha there. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining the webinar, and thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me to participate. I think stepping back a little bit, a lot of it is cultural. So an AI-ready enterprise, to me, it means embracing new ways of working and having an open mind to doing things just a little bit differently. It also means getting educated on what AI can do and what it can't do, and also getting educated about the tools that use AI that are out there. And it certainly helps, I think, to participate in webinars like this one and learn a little bit more about how AI is used in the market.
Excellent. Now, before today's webinar, we also had a lot of questions come through in advance, and we're certainly going to be looking to tackle some of those questions as we move through our discussion today. We had a lot of you actually ask us about what we at LexisNexis are doing in the AI sphere, and thankfully we're joined by Greg and Jamie, who will be able to fill us in on the current goings-on at LexisNexis. So, Jamie, I'm going to go to you first and ask about what some of the ways LexisNexis is already utilizing AI and generative AI to drive these benefits for our customers are.
Yeah, so we've been using traditional AI in our internal content enrichment processes and our external products for really over 10 years. So we started out in the kind of the language model space. We started using a regular language model about 5 years ago with a product called Google BERT. And then we incorporated large language models into our external products about 2 years ago. This is incorporated into Lexis Plus, like our flagship legal research product. This was about a couple of years ago with GPT-3, and then that was before ChatGPT. And when ChatGPT launched at the end of last year, it was a real step change in quality. And obviously, it kind of turned everything on its head. And so we started experimenting with ChatGPT right away. And we very quickly realized that there could be a huge opportunity for us to help our customers and also help our internal processes within the company. And so we pivoted teams to start building a new product around generative AI, really a couple months after that. Then we ultimately built out Lexis Plus AI. And last month, I'm very excited that we commercially released the product in the US after testing it with US customers for a few months. We are extremely excited about Lexis Plus AI, and we've seen unprecedented demand from the US market so far.
Thanks, Jamie. And I know we share that excitement here, and perhaps, Greg, you can talk us through a little bit about what that excitement means for our Australian customers in the future.
So first, I'll just back up a little bit and say we've also obviously on the same journey as the US. What's great is we're on a global platform. So what is developed in one place we can use in others. Before we talk about large language models, we've also deployed a number of what I think are very useful features already that use AI. Argument intelligence, argument analyzer is a good example, as is clause intelligence. And these are tools which enable us to be able to analyze whole documents, and what in the context of that document, understand what the legal issues and facts are, and be able to do things like recommend clauses or recommend a way in which you can start your research journey, identify case law, etc. And for me, that's a real example of AI where we've taken it but applied it very specifically to the legal use case and made sure that legal use case we are actually adding value. Because a big thing with any tool, whether it's AI or not, you should always be questioning, am I getting extra value for this? It's not just a nice shiny new toy. It's something that actually is providing value. And that's the big focus that I love from our product team, is that we always focus on the customer value. And of course, then there's the big bit. This is the exciting bit, that we have Lexis Plus AI in the US. Because we're on the global platform, we're going to get that next year. We're already working actively on localizing it. We're doing what we call extreme reuse because it's so easy to localize it. We believe a lot of it's just going to be to make sure that we can deploy it here on our content sets and make sure that it's as valuable as it is as it's proving to be in the US to our customers. But I'm pretty sure that we'll see that next year, in the first half of next year, and I'm very excited about that.
Equally exciting times for us here, as it
Yes.
is for our customers too. Now, in a moment, I'm going to move on from what we're doing here at LexisNexis to look at some of the user cases for our customers. Before I turn those questions over to you, I'm just going to reference the survey that I mentioned earlier that we ran with some of our customers earlier this year. Now, as I said, we had over 600 respondents to that survey. And one of the areas we asked those respondents about was whether they're using generative AI tools, and in particular, how they might be using those tools currently. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, by far the largest user case for the respondents to that survey was for writing emails, which is obviously a very common use case people are finding, particularly with some of the free to access LLMs. We had about 45% of respondents who are already using these tools for that user case. However, we also saw a relatively high number of respondents using the tools for more specific tasks. So things like understanding new legal concepts, we had about 27% of respondents using tools for that, and even generating first drafts of legal documents, with around 26% of respondents indicating that that was user case they were already working on. Now, if any of you who are listening in today are currently using generative AI for any particularly interesting user cases, we'd love to hear about it. So please pop that in the chat and we can call that out later. So I'm going to turn now to you, Natasha, and what I'd like to ask you about is, what are some of the ways that you, obviously in the unique position of actually providing advice to customers, what are some of the ways that your customers and clients are wanting to use AI and might be coming to you to ask for kind of advice and guidance about how they get started with that?
Thanks, Lindsay. That's a difficult question, because our clients sometimes are the clients who are building AI and using AI embedded in their tools. So I get very specific regulatory questions, which I imagine most of the audience is not particularly interested in. But suffice to say, if you are building AI tools, then be very conscious of things like AI washing, and make sure that you're not promising the world that you are actually using AI tools in a certain way or following certain processes, because people are starting to put these on their websites, for example, and you're not actually doing that. So be very cautious about AI washing. The second thing is, and let's go more to general ways that people, I liked how you said it, Lindsay, because you didn't say what is people doing, you said what do people want to be the way that inside legal departments and law firms that we're seeing clients use these tools, or just when we do a lot of work at a meta level, we're a law firm that supports law firms as well, which at a meta level, seeing what law firms doing. It's actually around not just legal research, if you will. That is actually one of the foundational ways that lawyers, let's call this AI supported law, that is a foundational way that people are using this technology already and will increasingly use this technology. However you think about this, if you think it's right or wrong, actually in terms of a junior lawyer capability, we're seeing increasing uses for first drafts coming out of a tool or an LLM. Caution there, because at the moment, obviously there's hallucinations, and there's even some laws that are being promoted in certain states, in certain like family law, certain areas where people are actually going to find themselves in quite a bit of trouble if they just put something forward without having read it themselves. A technical counterpoint to that is we're looking at some things called retrieval augmented generation and better LLMs from third-party providers, using things like OpenAI has GPT-5. Those LLMs are better. So you're actually getting less of a hallucination if you're using RAG technologies, for example. So that is a very big thing, is just using it to do the things that lawyers do. So we call it AI lawyer. But other thing that happens is we do a lot of stuff in a law firm or a legal department that's not law. And that's, for example, in your marketing, your BD. I know at Sterling and Rose, I mean, if you get on our website, you would see immediately we use a huge amount of large language models for image generation, video generation. Don't just think about large language models in respect of words. if I was to put a spreadsheet in front of you, there would be about 20 different fields. One of them would be word generation. So another place that you might see that is in your IT department. For example, if we talked about Copilot, Copilot is also being used for code production. So you can anticipate that your IT departments are also getting this leg up in being able to produce and solve problems inside a law firm, for example, because they can also get this first junior to get through the first part of a question. Sometimes people are using LLM secretly. Some firms are saying that they don't want people to use it, so people are still using it behind the scenes. Then they drag it in all different weird and wonderful ways. But the most way that we're seeing, especially larger firms use, just on the cusp of using internally, is through models like Harvey and also Copilot, Microsoft's Office 365, pulling those large language models directly into your Office 365 suite.
Thanks, Natasha. And really important to remember that despite us talking about large language models here, the capabilities obviously extend far beyond sort of words and kind of writing type user cases. Now, Greg, obviously you spend a lot of time with our customers and we'll hear from them about ways in which they're currently using AI or they're wanting to use kind of AI tools. What are some of the things you're hearing from them at the moment?
Before I jump into that, I might just add on to what Natasha's talked about. I think the retrieval augmented generation, the RAG side, is actually it's an important development that we've seen in recent months. That it's been talked about a lot more, which is really bringing to bear your internal content that you have as part of the prompt, if you like, when you're asking the large language model. So when you ask the large language model, it's normally general purpose, it's not specifically legally trained, and as a result, it's not as good at being able to give you the context of your answer from a legal perspective. With retrieval augmented generation, what you're doing is you're pulling in documents, normally through a search engine, which is then giving it a framework for the answer that it provides. And that's one of the things that we've done internally with our tools, is because we've obviously got all that content, we've got very good search engines. The RAG process actually helps to orientate that model around how it's going to answer the question that you have properly and in the context of what you need, and it also it reduces hallucinations significantly. So I think that's an important thing. And for all of you out there, this sounds complicated, but it's not that complicated. I think it's worth everybody getting across what RAG is. There's a great course on Coursera, for example, and just educate yourself on retrieval augmented generation.
Greg, a wonderful way I heard it that might be easy for lawyers to consume is think about RAG like a priority clause. So that it's taking information and applying it back to, like, if you think of a large language model, often just scrape the internet. So it's got lots of predictive capability, but it's not developed in concert with your particular set of instructions. RAG goes into your content and it prioritizes that content as the one that should really be trusted over the top of the general LLM.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
perfect. But it's a great way to think. Exactly right. Yes, this is where, exactly. You're giving it orientation. And it's, in a way, it's like talking to a junior researcher, right? This is the priority clause, is how you should think. And that's what you are in a large language model. It's generally intelligent, but it's not necessarily specifically intelligent. Yeah.
We've got a question. RAG is retrieval augmented generation. There you go.
Yes, there you go. There you go, done. And we can pop the Coursera course. Our last Tam is running this as an answer to that. It's very worthwhile doing these courses, only a couple of hours a week. So back to your question, Lindsay, looking across our customer set, I think it aligns very much to your first survey. There's some people who have dived in and are using it. I think what's good there is we're seeing an acknowledgement of the risks and the processes to take, and acknowledgement of things like hallucinations and how we can work with it. And I think that's the way you should be approaching it as a law firm. You have to. This is coming. It's coming, and it's inevitable. You want your staff to be across it as much as possible, but you need to give them the framework, the guidelines, so that they can operate within those guidelines. You've got to be careful about things like bias and risk, but at the same time, the efficiency gains that you can get are enormous. So Natasha's already mentioned Harvey. We've obviously seen Microsoft Bing. They're doing quite a lot, and they're hosting services on Azure. I understand that Airly, for example, which is part of Alan's Innovation Hub, that's been built on Azure's Open API service. So that's where you can use something like an Open API service, but sort of an open AI service, but in the context where your information is still protected. And that's the important thing, is to evaluate the technology you're using. ChatGPT is not protected. Your data and your content can be used. So you need to make sure that you are looking at the tools, evaluating them, and then rolling them out. We've seen that with a number of our customers. And the other thing, of course, is also Copilot from Microsoft, which we were on an early beta trial for. And it's a very exciting technology. And of course, now it's rolling out. So that's definitely something to play with. But the general thing I've seen across all of our customers is that at the moment, they're still using general purpose large language models. So these are generically trained, they're not legally trained, and then they're applying them to the legal use case. So the exciting thing is when we start to see legally trained, specifically legally trained models.
Thanks both. That was a really great overview of what, some of the ways people are either using these tools or looking to use these tools in the near term is. Jamie, I might turn to you for a moment because I'm particularly interested in, what's coming down the track. What do you see as some of the emerging user cases for generative AI moving forward?
Mm-hmm. In our customer discovery that we did early on for Lexis Plus AI, there were 3 big areas that surfaced. So these are areas that are important for our customers, and then also places where generative AI technology can especially help. So these include asking a complex legal research question, so then drafting a document just from a simple text prompt. We talked a bit about that. And then also summarizing content, so either kind of a single long document or a set of documents. So when we started testing these with customers, a 4th area came up just in feedback. So this was uploading a set of documents and then providing the ability to ask a bunch of questions about just those documents. So we prioritized a lot of specific use cases in those areas, and we continue to work on those. So those are 4 themes that we continue to work on, and they really have global applicability. So I think the extreme reuse that Greg was talking about, that's something that will apply to a lot of these use cases. So since we've launched, the most common request that we hear from customers is leveraging our legally trained LLM with their proprietary data. So that's something we're actively working on. So, both Greg and Natasha talked about using retrieval augmented generation to connect the large language model with our proprietary content, right? And we do that with Lexis Plus AI. That helps to reduce hallucination, improve the quality of the answers. And we're hearing from our customers that there's a lot of interest in connecting a legally trained LLM with their proprietary content. Now, obviously, doing this in a way that's safe and secure, that's private just to them, but that's something that we're actively working on.
Excellent. And Natasha, given the sort of demographic of the clients that you're currently advising, and as you said earlier, a lot of those are really at the forefront of developing some of these tools that we're going to see come through in the future. Same question to you. What are you seeing as some of these kind of emerging user cases for generative AI that we might be looking at a year or even a few years from now?
I think the one that I find most perplexing and the most interesting is this concept of AI agents. So this is relatively new, which is where we, and also the tech's not quite made out yet to effectively get an agent, and picture an agent, if you will, whereas it's kind of like a Siri on steroids. Siri is actually technically apparently held together with Band-Aids. But imagine if you could use a large language model or the next iterations of what large language models are to create a digital twin of yourself or a system or a process or a combination of people or processes or even a project, for example, a hospital running, and have I would call it an executive assistant that's part of that process and able to remember everything about it. And one of the things that when we're advising on this, because as I said, it's very, very new, is it really segues into smart legal contracts and making sure that you have the right rules, the right remedies, and also to ensure that you're not, again, who controls the data? I'm very reluctant to say who owns the data because data ownership is a perplexing legal question. But who controls the data? Do you have rights to the data that you're trying to use inside an agent, which is always the question with your LLMs? Most people would have seen this happening in terms of copyright questions. Okay, but that's a really interesting question. And another thing people are talking about is employment. So where the rubber hits the road on that is that in order to get good data, you actually need to surveil, or you need to, if you're wanting to create some LLM that does work of people, you're going to actually need to surveil people. So there's some legal questions around that, if you have the rights to do that. And that's certainly one of the knottier questions that's happening in large corporations, particularly. It's not quite there in smaller corporations yet, or smaller law firms, but at the large law firm level and large corporation level, is how do we play forward if, particularly if most enterprises are not charities, how do we, if we get the lower rungs of humans to not be able to do the work quite as well as a large language model, then how do we actually find the balance of using people? Because we still need to train people to do certain jobs, and we still need to be able to train models. So that's interesting, and it gets into synthetics, but that may be one step too far for this conversation. But synthetic data, if you're someone who's curious, worth looking into that as well.
But Natasha, I don't think it's too far a step to say we'll get more autonomous agents, because if you think about a large language model, especially the big ones, GPT-4 Turbo, for example, they're able to do multi-step reasoning. So you could ask it an open-ended question. It could come up with a framework for something like investigate my competitor. And it could say, I'll look at the website, I'll look at some of their products, blah, blah, blah. And then it can do that. So you can essentially create an agent which can do a multi-step reasoning process.
Quite right. It's all changing. So it's so quick. It's
very quickly.
So speedy. Every week it seems there's a new, it's very hard to be a technology. Don't be.
It's very fun to be one as well.
Almost impossible to predict the future in this area at the minute as things move so quickly.
Lindsay, I'm just conscious we've got a ton of questions. Sorry, so Jamie, jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we got a lot of great questions.
Yeah. Do we want to look at some of those?
Excellent. Yeah, so we've got a few of a sort of more technical nature while we're kind of on that point, which I think is definitely worth looking at. So one of the first questions we've got, probably quite quick to answer this one, is does ChatGPT-3 share your questions and inputted info with others? And obviously we'll be looking at this when we talk about risk mitigation, but we can probably answer that one quite quickly.
So I can talk about how we use large language models. So we take a multi-model approach with Lexis plus AI, and so we access the OpenAI models, GPT-4, ChatGPT, etc. We also access the Anthropic model. So Anthropic has a really world-class set of models called Claude 2, but we only access them through trusted cloud providers. So the OpenAI models we access through Microsoft Azure. The Anthropic models we only access through Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, through their Bedrock large language model platform. And that's an important distinction because our data and our customers' data, when accessed through those platforms, it's contractually protected. So none of the data is used to train a model. None of the information ends up bleeding across customer sessions. It's all completely private, and that's really important. And OpenAI, when folks access ChatGPT through OpenAI directly, which is basically just their free website, there's initially it was all being used to help to train the model to improve it. Now they've recently said that they've made some changes to that and so that it's private, but we don't access any information directly through the OpenAI website. We only access the models directly, our own private copies, through Microsoft Azure and AWS Bedrock. And that helps to make sure that everything is secure and protected.
I think if I could just add something to that, this is one of the instances in life where you get what you pay for in terms of legal protection. So if you're paying for a service, particularly a well-constructed enterprise service of an LLM, you're more likely to have data protections. Same thing as they say, you are the product if you're not paying and you're using something freely. Just to reiterate what Jamie said, if you're using ChatGPT for free, unless you go in and turn the data off, you are the data. You are, and maybe that's okay for you because that's the social contract that you're agreeing to. So when you pay, you are better if you're concerned about data, you're concerned about confidentiality and privacy. Then be aware that check the terms and conditions of who you're agreeing to do business with when you're giving data over.
Yeah, and continue to check them because they do tend to change from time to time as well.
Right.
Yeah. So read the T's and C's. We always click the button and go, but in this case, read the T's and C's.
A really interesting question here about the concept of AI washing, which I haven't heard before, but I'm certainly going to use going forward, where companies are alluding to their products or services being AI driven, but perhaps not actually really being AI driven. The question here is, what measures can enterprises take to ensure that they're investing in authentic and effective AI solutions?
One thing for legal departments that I have seen is that there's a bit of, because these things can be happening across the whole organization, sometimes the left hand hasn't spoken to the right hand. And one thing to be very careful of is that your technical team has implemented, your marketing team has gone to market and said something, that the lawyers, because they're often not really tech savvy, rightly or wrongly, they think, oh, it's not to do with me. They actually don't even know what's happened. And I've been in a very large corporation which had an amazing AI set of policies, strategies, everything, and then went to meet with the legal team. They didn't even know about it, and it was on their website, and I brought it to their attention because I was helping them. So just be very careful that the legal function really understands what the marketing teams and the tech teams are doing. But sorry, Greg, I think I interrupted you.
No, completely. I think it's exactly right, and it's back to the point of, it doesn't even matter if it's not AI. The important thing that you want to look at is it providing value? That's the first and foremost thing. And any product you should just evaluate through that. Now, I believe that with large language models, as Jamie and Natasha have so adequately talked about today, there is a step change in how you're going to do legal research and how you can approach things like summarizing huge drafts of information that's coming in, creating that first draft. But there's still going to be a huge need for you as a lawyer to be an oversight, to be an overseer, to understand the legal context, etc. And that's where the value is going to come from. But before you even worry about whether it's AI or not, the AI washing is just the latest thing. Last one before that, it was blockchain. And the one before that, it was, I don't know, name a digital trend that we can add on to. Ignore the washing, focus on the value that you're getting.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And that question of value is a really important one. We've actually got another question. The last one I'm going to take for now relates specifically to that kind of value of these tools. And the question is that, given that a lot of the people who are very interested in adopting AI might be those sort of younger, more junior legal professionals, how can they make a case to persuade the senior decision makers in the business, CTOs, IT departments who kind of make a lot of the purchasing decisions to actually invest in these tools?
I'll start, but I'm sure Natasha, you go for it, Jamie.
No, go for
it. My first answer is, remember when Steve Jobs stood on stage and he introduced the iPhone? And if you were BlackBerry, you could say, why would we worry about that? It's just another smartphone. We're already doing email. We're already doing everything else. Look now and look what's happened to BlackBerry. I do personally believe this is an iPhone moment for the legal industry in general. This is where we are applying AI to huge quantities of complex text and being able to get real value out of it. So that's where I would start. And then the other side I would say is, you're not going to get beaten by AI. An AI pure firm is not going to outcompete you. It's a firm that uses AI that is going to outcompete you. So we need to be on the forefront of understanding how to use it. Sorry, Jamie, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, I think to Greg's earlier point about making sure that the tool is actually adding value, I think that you don't necessarily have to convince other folks in the firm to leverage AI. Just try to convince them to use a tool that looks like it's helping, that it's adding value. Now, obviously, you have to make sure that any kind of AI that's being adopted is done in a safe and secure and kind of quality way, which we talked a lot about. But if the tool is actually adding value, if it seems to be improving output quality, productivity, then that's a positive thing. And over time, there's more and more of these tools are going to be using AI. We've been using AI for quite a bit, and now generative AI, and we're really bullish on the technology. But it is really important. We're not just forcing a technology into every possible use case. Blockchain. So Greg mentioned blockchain, right? I mean, that was one where it's like, it's a buzzword. It's a really cool technology, but kind of outside of cryptocurrency and maybe in some cases smart contracts, there just weren't a lot of really practical applications that were really useful for folks. But generative AI is quite different. There are a lot of really practical applications, and we're kind of building them, and we're seeing them every day.
Excellent.
I've got 3 answers. As someone who has absolutely worked on trying to convince people in digitalization over many years, these are the 3 that have worked for me. 1, duties, legal duties. So legal duties brought on narrow AI already. You're not all sitting around a table doing discovery anymore by people. It's being done by machines. It's done by narrow AI, has been for many years. And why is that? because there's been case law that said that technology assisted review actually is more efficient and cheaper and better for clients. And that's part of your legal duties to do those things in the best way that you can. So legal duties, if there's a legal duty there, oftentimes your general counsel and risk, they're not going to be able to ignore that. So that's the first one. The second one is clients. If you're in a law firm and you want to use something, just get a client to say they want to use it. You're pretty much guaranteed you'll be able to move forward with that. And the last one is one Greg already said, which is competitors. Those are the three things that I would consider drive law firms, but competitors pretty much drives everybody.
That's an awesome answer. I'm going to take notes on that one.
Brilliant.
Hard-learned experience.
So we're going to move on now to kind of have a look at some of the more practical steps that law firms can take when they're looking to either adopt these kinds of tools, or even some of them might be thinking about developing their own tools. Just before I put the questions to our panelists, we're going to actually flash up now our second poll of the day, which is, does your firm currently have a policy on the internal use of generative AI tools? And whilst we wait for the results to come in on that poll, I'm going to put our next question to you first, Natasha. So there's a lot of people on today's call, as we know from the poll at the outset, who are at that stage of looking for where do they start with adopting these kind of tools, or possibly even developing their own. So what are some of the practical steps that law firms can take now to prepare for the use of these tools?
I think we've probably gone over a few of those things already, but something that you can do, anybody on this call, never before in history has it been so accessible for somebody to upskill themselves personally. So if you want to have compelling arguments inside your organization, actually be literate. If you have a governance position inside your organization, do those things. Jamie said education. Do those things that educate the people inside your organization so they're literate. So one thing that can be super annoying to experts in this area is there's a lot of buzzwords, and people say things. We want the AI to be transparent. We want the AI to be accountable, and those words actually don't mean a whole lot when they hit the actual, as I said, the data scientists, when they're trying to make decisions at algorithmic level. That's actually very difficult to do. So I would say the first thing you can do is educate yourself, or else if you have a position of authority inside a firm or inside a legal facility, then make sure that you're educating the people around you, because without that literacy, you're not even going to be making the right decisions or adopting the right technologies. You certainly won't know what to buy or what to build, or where your risks or where your opportunities are. My colleague, the head of our AI practice, SJ Price, we just came back from Austria, and we did a similar survey, and we said, what is the biggest risk of using a generative AI? And the first response that came back for some of the largest companies in the world is not using AI. So that's the biggest risk. So that if everybody could just think about that for 20 risks, that's the world's leaders in governance from some of the biggest publicly listed companies are saying not using AI is your biggest risk right now.
Yeah, I think that's so important to hear that, things are moving forward so quickly that anybody who's not already on this journey could get left behind incredibly quickly. Just to check in on those poll results, we've got around 22% of people who are with us today already have an existing policy. Well done, congratulations. I won't ask a follow-up question as to how many of your teams have actually read and know where that policy is. We've also got a similar number who are currently working on policies as well, which is really good to see that a lot of firms are taking quite proactive measures in this space. Now, in view of time, I'm going to leap ahead now to looking at some of our risk mitigation strategies. Again, a lot of the questions we've received in today's chat and in the pre-questions were around the really practical steps that people can take to mitigate some of the risks that we're now, very well aware of when it comes to these tools, particularly with generative AI. We know that some of those risks include factors such as AI hallucination, privacy concerns, data governance, and other areas that we have touched on earlier today. So again, I might actually start, Jamie, with you on this one to look at some of the ways that LexisNexis is mitigating these risks ourselves. And then Natasha, I'll come to you to look at the kind of advice you're providing to your clients.
There's a few things that we do. We touched on a number of them already. So on the hallucination front, it is a problem. I mean, ChatGPT right out of the box will hallucinate. It's really just not good enough for complex legal use cases. And so we connect a large language model. So again, we work with multiple large language models. Some are better suited for different use cases, and so we're always experimenting. But we connect them through our content. We talked a little bit about RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. So that's really helpful to make sure that the answers themselves are grounded. Also, when we show an answer, so when a customer types in a question and we show an answer to the question, we include citations with each answer so you can research yourself. So you could double check that those documents are actually answering the question properly. And that's really impossible to do because out of the box, large language models don't really provide any grounding. And so they're just trained on open content from across the internet. So that's really important. So connecting it with proprietary content. On a security perspective, I talked about the importance of using trusted cloud providers. So when a model is used, let's say in Microsoft Azure or with the Anthropic or other models used in AWS Bedrock, it's a copy of the model, and none of the data that's used, none of our data, none of our customers' data is used to improve the model. As I mentioned, none of the data bleeds across customer sessions. That's really, really important. And you want to try to avoid being the product in this scenario, right, as Natasha talked about. And so anyway, so that's really important from a security perspective. And one other thing from an ethical perspective, so we're part of a parent company is called RELX, and we have a set of responsible AI principles that we developed a number of years ago that certainly apply to generative AI as well. So you can Google those. You can try ChatGPT. You might get hallucinations, so Google might be a little bit more reliable here, but you could access our responsible AI principles just to understand a little bit more about some of the things that we consider whenever we develop any kind of AI-driven product.
Jamie, I've just popped it in on one of the answers to one of the questions, the reference to that.
Thanks, Greg. So Natasha, I'm sure this is an area that you are being called upon at the moment to give a lot of advice to some of your clients. What are the kind of concerns you're seeing being raised in this space, and how are you advising your clients to kind of take a proactive approach to some of these areas?
Perhaps I might take a moment here to talk about the law itself. So one of the things that we're seeing in terms of a risk profile is that every industry has its own set of laws that will set up how they respond and what their risk profile is to the adoption or the risks that they have come about through the use of AI or generative AI specifically. So an example of that might be, we've just done some work with safety officers in the safety industry. They have a whole set of safety laws which have objects which require them to continuously make risk as low as reasonably possible. And a continuous requirement to reduce the amount of risk in the organization, in the industry. So can you imagine if they weren't using AI and AI was available, there's a legal risk for them sitting in there, which is that they didn't actually follow their base law of their industry. So I just want you to follow that. Same things with compliance. There is really base legal reasons that people will need to use AI and then use AI really well. So another example is there's things that have been around for a long time, like GDPR. And GDPR, for example, has already got, I think it's Article 22, which is about automated individual decision making and making sure you can't have a data subject to a decision solely based on automated processing. So those laws are already there. So just using generative AI inside your organization, if you have a global footprint, you need to be conscious of GDPR. Australian privacy law is not quite the same as GDPR. There's people agitating for it to be for very good reasons, but it's not quite there yet. So look at the laws that apply to you in respect of AI. Don't just think of AI law. There's some really interesting questions that are happening all around the globe. People sort of thumping the table. It makes sense to say, what is the AI law? We need to regulate AI. It's a really easy thing to say, but it's actually very, very difficult to do. And the reason it's difficult to do is if I had said to you, I don't know, 30 years ago, let's make a computer law about how computers should be good or not good, that would have been a really crazy thing to try to capture in a law. But what we are finding is that individual pieces of legislation for a particular industry is the place to look about your legal risk profile. And there are other, not hard law, but soft law approaches, which are, you will see, even the EU has had the EU AI Act. It's actually being changed at the last moment to move it to a more voluntary prescription. China, if you're doing business in China, China already has hard law in respect of AI and how you can use it. It's very prescriptive. Who knows how it's actually going to be prosecuted, but it's very hard law. And then in Australia, we mostly have voluntary type ethical AI subscriptions. Again, some of those, even the ones that are touted in Australia very commonly, they actually were designed around narrow AI. They weren't designed around generative AI and the new risks that are sitting in generative AI. If I could just finish that comment with one more example of something that's completely perhaps left of field of the things that you're thinking about when you think about generative AI risk, because most people just think about hallucinations right now. It's something that is a client that came to us who is doing something with using generative AI, which is helping, I have to be very careful here how I describe this, helping a particular group of people who are minors to be able to get additional funds. It's a beautiful product. It's very helpful to children to be able to get additional funds for wonderful talents that they have. But in order to do that, they're using an LLM. And remember, some of these things, there is a perfect data memory of what's being done. You're going to need to surveil children in this encounter. And then when you get into digitalization, you end up creating tokens or using the LLM or the agent to be able to actually transact as money. So there's some really interesting new ethical questions about us productizing ourselves and productizing vulnerable groups, because in order to get to AI, you need to surveil, you need to have data. So questions about, think about the data that's used, how did you get it, is it fair, is it reasonable? Then think about what is the tech that I'm using over the top of that data, who am I doing business with? As I said, look at your contracts. Do I have the rights to do what I'm doing with that? And then the outputs themselves, what am I doing with the outputs? And remember, AI done well is an infinite loop, because you're using the outputs to train the new future as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Natasha. That was incredibly helpful and touched on a few of the more specific questions we're getting coming through on the sort of legalities of some of these issues in this area. So before I move on to one of our final questions, we're going to pop up the last of today's poll, which is around how would you describe your organization's readiness to adopt generative AI tools? And while we're waiting for the results to come in on that poll, I'm going to turn to you, Greg, because one of the questions, again, that we received in advance was really around roadmaps for organizations as they either start on this journey or progress on their AI journey. And I was wondering if you could talk us through, given your sort of role in shepherding our organization through some of these changes, what are some of the practical steps that organizations can take on this journey?
Great question. So we internally here, obviously, we're a fast follower to the US, and although we do a lot of prescriptive AI, we have also obviously going to get generative AI next year. And part of that process was, how do we make sure that we as a business are culturally ready? Jamie mentioned that in the very first question. You've got to have the cultural framework. And it's my belief that any organization to change, you've got to have the cultural desire for change, and you've got to build that into the way you think about your culture. You've got to be essentially, culture becomes your primary driver of change. So what do we do when you're thinking about this? We looked at essentially all the stakeholders. We looked at our employees, making sure how well that they are trained. We looked at our internal processes and understood how well we can change those processes and what we can do immediately by doing things like using the Claude console, just like ChatGPT, but in this case, it's something that we have control over, and we know that the data is not going anywhere. And using that Claude console for our employees to test and learn themselves. So culturally, to say to them, you're currently doing a particular process, why don't you play with generative AI and see if it can change the process, and then feed back to us. So the first thing was, what are we doing with our processes? Second thing was, how are we making sure that our employees are as well trained as possible and they're learning? Then, of course, it's all about our customers and making sure that our customers that we work very closely with and understand their journey. This is obviously one of those ways, but going to see our customers, understanding their journey. And they're all on a curve, right? There's the early adopters who are jumping in, there's the majority, and then there's the laggards. And that curve applies for any new technology. So that was a big part as well, is to understand what our customers are doing and where they're at. And then, of course, the other side was for us to understand our own content. Now, we're a content business, so that's something we really do understand. But you have to relook at your content every time you apply a new technology. So now that we're looking at generative AI, how do we do deep embeddings? How do we make sure that the content is relevant across a very wide question? Whereas before, a lawyer would come in and ask a search, and they would be looking for case law, for example. Now they'll come in and ask for something that's very wide, and we might hit practical guidance, case law, legislation, some secondary or analytical content, and have to formulate an answer based on all of that. So understanding how our content was ready. So a lot of it was about the readiness for our entire organization, which really required us to step back and look at our organization holistically. And then, of course, the other side is engagement with the future. And in our case, the future is a lot of what the US team's doing, a lot of what Jamie's team's doing. So Jamie, I'm calling you the future, officially, publicly here. But that's really just saying, what is the art of the possible? What do we have now? An as is and a to be analysis, and then making sure that we can address both of those.
Excellent. And talking about that kind of curve of readiness, we can see that in our poll results, with most of today's attendees sitting in that middle group of either some employees who are fully engaged in this area and some who are, not quite ready yet but interested. Now, sorry, Greg, you go ahead.
I know there was a question earlier on about copyright. I don't want to go too much into that, but I just think it's important for us all to realize that a lot of the content we're all working with is copyrighted, and there's going to be a lot of emerging law in the next couple of years around that, and we obviously as a business take that very seriously. So we make sure that what we do with the content is very much what we're allowed to do, and that's something you need to do as well when you're looking at the content that you put into your large language models.
Thanks, Greg. Now, there's one question I'm desperate to get to, but in view of the time, I'm going to have to give you all about a minute to answer it, I'm afraid. So quick fire round for everybody. How do you think existing roles are going to start to evolve? And what, if any, new roles do you think we're going to start to see in organizations, particularly in legal organizations, as AI starts to become more ingrained with sort of day-to-day work? Let's start with you, Natasha. I can see you thinking.
Oh, I was thinking, I thought you were going to pick me. Why don't I try to be extremely positive as an end, and I'll leave it to anybody else, because it's easier to do the negative version of how this story ends, but let's go with the positive one. One thing I'm fascinated by is interstellar travel. Can't do it yet. We haven't cured cancer yet. There's some really basic things. We don't even know what makes, I like to say this, we don't know what makes women morning sick, as someone who's experienced that many times. So I'd like to think that the thing that's going to change is if we strip out some of the administrative grind of a lot of what we do. A lot of us sit around all the time, trapped to screens, drafting just stuff that's been done before by someone else. So if we're freed up, inshallah, if we were just freed up a little bit more, I've seen this in my own experience. Things I've had sitting on the backlog to do, which my wilder projects, I could get to my wilder projects because I wasn't spending so long on the boring first stuff. The easy stuff is just repetitious stuff. So if we can do that, maybe there are bigger projects for humanity that are considered sufficiently valuable to use humans to reach for the stars.
A wonderful answer, Natasha. I like the positivity. We might go to you next, Jamie, since you're our voice of the future here.
Yeah, when generative AI is doing the innovation, it's going to be incredible. You'll really see a step change in kind of quality of life. And so we've seen a lot of technical advances over the years. Back in the day, we invented online legal research, based on before researching was only happening in books, and it also went to machine learning techniques and AI tools, and each time there was a lot of concern, what is this going to do for the legal profession? And this time it's really different, and really ultimately over time we've seen the number of lawyers increase. Now obviously the roles change. We have seen that, and so it is important generally to kind of understand these techniques and tools and technologies as much as possible and to adopt them, and in some cases, like I said, the roles will change, but we've only seen the number of lawyers increase over time. And so I think that's going to continue here too. And so generative AI, where it is right now, it is evolving really quickly, but it is very exciting, all the things that that can be done with it. And so I'm highly optimistic for the future.
And finally, Greg, we'll finish with you on that question.
And I'll keep the positive theme going. I'm also very optimistic. As I'm an engineer originally, and I think about the way you designed a plane in the 50s. You drew on paper. Now you design it in a computer environment, and you can do simulations and everything else. So there's a huge step change in how airplanes were designed, but you still need the engineer, you still need the thinking, you still need those skills. You're just in much more enabled and much more productive, and I think that's cool. The other thing, of course, is I do believe that business skills and people skills, as they always are for any of us, are going to be more and more important. So as a lawyer, make sure that not only are you well legally trained and able to evaluate these models, but make sure you've got those other arrows to your bow, the business and the people skills.
Thanks, Greg. Now, while I just thank all of our panelists today for today's incredibly interesting discussion, I'm just popping up on the screen now a code for if you want to stay in the loop with us with future discussions such as these. We've got a lot of questions and comments in our chat today. Feel free to continue to add to that before we close out, and we can look at those and see if there's future topics of interest for us to engage with you with. So if you would like to join our free AI Insider program, please do use the QR code on screen to sign up for that, and you will be first in line to hear about the exciting developments we've got coming up in Australia, as well as future discussion forums such as these. And thank you very much to all of our panelists today. It's been incredibly interesting to hear your thoughts on this area, and thanks to all of you for attending.